Welcome, everybody. Margie, can you hear me? Margie?
I can hear you. How you doing?
I'm great. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for the response.
Yes, sir.
Welcome back to all of you to the week 3 Zoom session for ED 720 curriculum. First, I'd like to apologize to Cassandra. I kept calling her Chelsea last week. Please accept my apologies, and I'll try not to do that again. My bad. The chat box is open, and I invite you to put questions or comments there if you'd like to. I will get to those after I make my opening comments and remarks. Please remember that we have no Zoom session on week 7 of the course. In week 7, you'll get the final exam. In fact, I'll be pushing the final exam to you during the discussion forum in week 4 next week. So you'll get an early look at that, and you can begin working on it. Although if you've looked at the syllabus, you already know what's coming at you anyway. The assignments in week 7, by the way, if you'll remember, the assignments in week 7 will be due on that Saturday night instead of our typical Sunday night deadline. That gives me a little extra time to grade those before I have to put the grades in the grade book early that next week. The APA citations, I can feel some of you growling at me. Even when you revise them, you're being nice to me, and I appreciate that. I am not an APA purist, I promise you. But the 4 things that you need to get in those APA citations somehow is the person that created the content, the human being, if at all possible. You're looking for the name of the person or persons. The second thing you need in there is the year that that content was created. The third thing you need in there is the title of the content. And the fourth thing you need in there is where it was published, or the URL you found, if you got it online, the URL where you found it and where other learners that would like to look at it can find it as well. So those are the 4 things I'm looking for. And so if you, many of you got the ding from me telling you that your citation's not quite right, it means I didn't see all 4 of those things. So if you'll get those right, we'll be happy. And really, that should be the easiest part of your work. And most of you seem to be getting a pretty good grasp of that. The discussion forums, I've had several questions from a few of you with regard to the discussion forums. My intention is to only give you 2 per week. And almost always I will launch the first one at you early on Monday morning, and then the second one will be coming at you usually early on Wednesday morning. And so you can kind of, like everything else I structure for you, I like to keep it fairly consistent for you so you'll know how to plan your week and your work around it. So you can look for those 2 prompts every week, early Monday morning, early Wednesday morning. My grading, so in week 1 and week 2, as you know, the grading rubric I use for your work is a 0 to 3 scale. 1 means minimal, 2 means adequate, and 3 means substantive. And so if some of you have been getting 2, and some of you have been getting 1, and I'll tell you, I've been telling you in week 1 and 2, here's my assessment. It was either minimal or it was adequate, but not substantive. And in week 1 and week 2, I've been telling you, if you'd like to try again for improved grade, have at it. And many of you have. I think some of you have not been watching the videos, though. But in any event, now that week 2's over and we're in week 3, if you get a grade on an assignment that you're not pleased with and you'd like to try again, you're more than welcome to do it. You'll have to initiate that now. I'm not going to initiate it anymore. So just know that if you get a grade that you'd like to improve, then I'm going to let you do it over. I'm looking, by the way, I'm looking in your work. I'm looking for evidence of your critical engagement with the content and some degree of reflection on your part on how that impacts you and your learning and your practice. I'm not looking for factual recitations or summaries. We're past that. We're in graduate school. For instance, if you tell me that one of your takeaways is that you learned the difference in apples and oranges, and you just stop right there. No, no. Tell me what those differences are, what that means to you. Put a little meat on those bones. Help me out. I want all of you to make an A. It makes me feel better when I have to do when I open that great books, put a bunch of A's in there. So get after it. The redos, I initiated those on week 1 and week 2. So now it's up to you if you want to redo an assignment. You take the initiative. And if you'll notice in the collective learning in learning tasks 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and the same thing happened in week 1. If you look in those collective learning for week 1, we have 60 really smart people in this class, and we're all looking at the same pieces of content, but it's somewhat remarkable that what we take out of it is so vastly different. And a lot of that's based on your experiences and that your tenure so far, how many years you've been at the work. A lot of it's based on the education that you've had thus far. And some of you are right at the very front end of your graduate work, and then some of you are at the very tail end of your graduate work. And that certainly has a bearing, because graduate school will change the way you think, for sure. But it's just interesting that we're all looking at exactly the same pieces of content, but we're taking out some very, very, very different things. Same thing happens in your classroom. I think you know that as well. It doesn't matter whether you're teaching 2nd graders or 8th graders or 10th graders. If 10th graders can learn anything. On Learning Task 2.3, Marissa noted Dr. Rahi's assertion that teachers don't cover the curriculum, they uncover it. And that's a pretty insightful comment. And I also am fond of that, by the way, Marissa. I like to view teaching as artisanship. Is there some art to it? Absolutely. Is there some science to it? Absolutely. But the very best teachers are the ones that blend the art and the science into a craft. And that I think a great word for it, an archetype, if you will, is artisanship. It's the ability to take the science and the art and blend it into something that's beautiful and meaningful for the students that we serve. Several of you noted the impact of curricular choice on the marketability of your school. And I'm glad you picked up on that. Schooling is big money, and the marketplace is increasingly crowded. In fact, you being in this course, in this class, this online program at LSU Shreveport is a case in point. You have many options by which you could have pursued your graduate degree. For some reason, and probably for many reasons, you chose LSU Shreveport, and we are thankful. I'm particularly thankful that you chose it. But I hope you're beginning to see, and some of you have pointed it out, that not only the curriculum you use, but the way you package that curriculum can be used as a marketing tool for your school, for your campus, and for your publics, if you will, your audiences. For those of you, especially those of you in the C&I program, many of you will be heading towards central office jobs as instructional coaches or curriculum specialists. And so that'll be increasingly important to you. And that's one of the reasons I give you such a broad exposure, not only to the different levels of curriculum, but the different packages that it can come in, because at some point in time, you're going to be the one trying to sell some curriculum of one kind or another. Most of you will, and even those of you in the MEDL program, in the leadership program, you're going to be in the business of selling curriculum as well as a bunch of other things in your career as you move into those roles. In Learning Tasks 4 and 5, that's the two learning tasks in which you're digging around on curriculum. Learning Task 4 every week is when I'm asking you to take a compare and contrast view of two two curricula from two different states. And then in Learning Task 5 every week, I'm asking you to do a compare and contrast between two different school districts. And some of you have kind of been misfiring on Learning Task 5. Please remember, in Learning Task 5, you're looking at two districts. My recommendation to you is to look at two different, usually pretty large districts. It's easy to find their curriculum online. If you get in rural schools, sometimes it's pretty hard. And a lot of charter schools don't have a very robust website, so it's kind of difficult sometimes to find what they're doing. But almost always, if you seek the large public school districts, you should be able to find what you're looking for. I think those two experiences, though, those compare and contrast of two state curricula and then those compare and contrast in Learning Task 5 of two district curriculum, I was very intentionally exposing you to a broad range of stuff, different disciplines, all the way from the academic stuff to the electives. And as we move on, it'll even be some of the fringe electives, if you will. So you can get a taste and a feel for that. But you can see even in already that a lot of times the packaging and the structure of those curricula of the academic stuff is significantly different than what you see in the elective marketplaces. Like last week, we were looking at the fine art, some of the fine arts stuff. It's very important for me, particularly for those of you that are going to be in the leadership roles, but not exclusively for you. I wanted you to see the whole breadth of early education to the high-end high school courses, so you can get a feel for the way that content progression looks over time. And some of you have even mentioned your interest being piqued to the point to where, let's say, I forget who it was, it said that they were teaching fourth grade, but after examining some of that curriculum, they thought they were going to go back and dive in and take a look at the curricula pre and post in the grades, the grade 3 and grade 5. Perfect. That's the kind of hound dogging that I'd love to see you do. Content progression is an important thing, and as you'll see, and as I think you've probably been learning, we're really pretty good as a nation, and in almost all states as well, having a nice, clear understanding of the content progression for English language arts and for mathematics and for social studies and the sciences. But when you get into stuff like the socio-emotional learning content, or perhaps dance, or perhaps woodshop, which I taught for a few years during my teaching career, you don't see very nearly the quality of structure in the content progression and those kinds of things. Sometimes it's just because the courses are just standalone, what we call as master schedule builders among us would call them singletons. I mean, if you're teaching, for instance, woodshop, you're probably teaching woodshop 1, woodshop 2, or woodshop 3, and that's it. It doesn't stretch from pre-K through 12. And so typically those singletons or doubletons or tripletons, the ones that appear just a few times, the way those curricula are structured is very different than what you see, for instance, in mathematics as it moves from pre-K through 12. And then I already mentioned to you the marketing piece. There have been a lot of comments made by you all in your submissions to the learning task about in learning tasks 4 and 5 about the way a particular curriculum was packaged, structured, whether there were lots of visuals, whether there were links to it, whether they had nice graphic representations in there. And so that's something important for you as you think about the possibility of either crafting curriculum yourself at some point in time or trying to sell it to somebody. You're probably going to be in that position one way or the other, and almost all of you will be in the position of manipulating curricula from your your respective seats at the educational table. Learning task. I'll stay on the topic of learning tasks 4 and 5 for a moment. A number of you have noted that you're finding some additional and interesting resources, and that, yay, voila. That's exactly what I was hoping would happen to you. Let me add to that, though. One of the reasons that I feed back to you the collective learning every week so that you can see the thoughts of everyone in the class is those collective learning repositories are also nice sources of future content resources for you. And so at the end of this course, I encourage you, I'm not going to turn those off, but I encourage you to download those as a PDF and save them somewhere if you want to, or however you save your stuff. But most of you will have subsequent coursework after this class is over. And almost always your professors are asking you to come up with resources, content, and so those collective repositories, the collective learning repositories, I think you'll find serve as a pretty nice database for you to not only ping the thoughts of some really smart people as you're trying to write papers and reflective responses to prompts, but also you're going to find a lot of resources that you can rely on in the future, and a number of mentions of proprietary resources as well. I forgot who it was that was mentioning that. I think it was Lindsay maybe that mentioned that she compared two states in the mathematics curriculum that I asked you to look at, and both of those states happen to be users of a proprietary product called IXL, which is really a good tool. It's an excellent product. I'm familiar with it. But you're learning about some other of those proprietary products as well. Let me move on here. The district curriculum crunching is going to be, it has been a little clunky, I think, in both of those, Learning Task 4 and Learning Task 5. It's going to get easier as you dig. One of the ways you can use the collective learning repositories is now that you can look back at week 1 and week 2, and you can see some of the school districts that your classmates have been able to identify some curriculum in. Somebody I remembered used San Jose, California, and then another one used Fremont County in Wyoming, I think. So they're automatically, there's two places that you know just by looking back in the collective learning repository that you can go. Those are districts that you can look at in the future if you're looking for district curriculum of some kind or another. If you're still having trouble with that, or with the APA citations, please use the Sandbox Forum. It's fine with me if y'all cheat with each other. Ask each other questions in the Sandbox Forum, and if somebody happens to know the APA citation for, which one was it? The one, I think it was maybe Learning Task 1.2 that it was kind of tricky finding the 4 components of the APA citation, but one of your classmates can surely find it and help you out there. But talk to each other in that Sandbox forum. Common Core. One of you had indicated that I think what you said, that you discovered that 45 of the 50 U.S. states have adopted Common Core. I'll take your word for it. I haven't done that research. But the Common Core, what I think you're seeing, and a number of you have come across states that use the Common Core. The Common Core standards does not mean the foci or the it doesn't reference the focal points or the common deployment strategies. You're learning that. The Common Core is really the what you're supposed to be teaching, or what the students are supposed to be learning. The how and the when is often left up to the states and even to the school districts, and which we're beginning to, in our course progression now, we're fixing to move from some of that more abstract stuff about theory and the overview kind of stuff, and then we're approaching some of the more concrete elements, the nuts and bolts kinds of things, and those include, as you've been hearing from some of your content providers, that the curriculum is not just about what's written on the document. It has everything to do with the way it gets deployed by the teacher in the classroom. Lindsay's response on Learning Task 2.2 reminded me actually on that topic of the work of Dr. Lisa Blaschke, whose research is centered on the impact of the maturity of the learner on the quality and the quantity of the learning that can be accomplished. And that Dr. Blaschke's point is that an astute teacher that's tuned in to the various levels of maturity of the learners within their classrooms can structure the deployment strategies in such a way to optimize that learning for every one of those students, regardless of their maturity level. That's important stuff. And some words that Dr. Blaschke pitches out there, and these are some words that I know you know the word pedagogy, but another word that Dr. Blaschke uses is called andragogy, and another one is called heutagogy. And you're probably not that familiar with those words, but you can look them up, dig them up, and it's pretty interesting stuff. I love the work of Dr. Blaschke. Several of you mentioned that you're, how do I put this? You are encumbered with the responsibility of deploying what they call teacher-proof curriculum. Some of you even have a scripted curriculum. And I'm sorry for you if you have to live under that. But, you know, every time I see that, and it's not a new development at all. It's been around for years and years and years. The concept that if you can create some sort of curriculum that's good enough to overcome a bad teacher. And it can't do it. But if you could, just think about this. If you could, then they don't need us. If you can create a curriculum that can accomplish the learning objectives regardless of who the teacher is, then really all you need is a robot to deliver it, or an avatar. That'd be more attractive, I guess, visually. But at the end of the day, the learning occurs or doesn't occur mostly on the strength of the quality of the teacher. It helps absolutely, as Rick Dufour and Dr. Robert Marzano advises. It helps immensely that you have a viable and guaranteed curriculum. That's the language they use. And I'm sure you've heard that probably in some other classes. At the end of the day, the quality of the teacher is the fundamental primary determinant on the quality of the learning that occurs in the classroom. The slippage issue, the prompt that I gave you on slippage, the discussion prompt, it was very interesting reading to see that all of you are becoming increasingly aware of the impact of the unwritten curriculum on deployments, and also the written curricular omissions that occur in schools every day. Some of the healthy examples were given. David, that's in class here tonight with us, gave one of the healthiest examples I remember. And many of you gave some examples that were obviously not very healthy examples. But that's the way of it is. And I'm glad that you're becoming more and more aware of those nuances and variances. I'll relate to you a couple of the jobs that I held while I was working in public schools. I served two different very large comprehensive high schools as a campus principal. And in both of those schools, one of the challenges that we faced was that the advanced placement community within those campuses the word that I usually use with it is elitist. The mindset was very elitist, and so there was this unwritten curriculum and subservience to this mindset that only certain students could access those advanced placement courses. And so in both of those campuses, I willingly and perhaps naively stepped into the battle to try to make sure that all students were given opportunity to access those courses and not being denied those courses. I'm a believer in social justice and equity, and I did not like what I was seeing in that unwritten curriculum, if you will, of certain students being shut out of that high quality, rigorous instructional formatting simply because of their demographic status of one kind or another. I got some pretty deep scars from fighting those battles, by the way. I still wear them, but I wear them proudly. You'll notice now that the curriculum, as we move further and further along, and we got some of this in the first week when we were talking about the overviews and the history, but all the curriculum is nested within the sociological and political context, both at the local level and the broader state level and even the national level. And it's not necessarily good or bad. People hammer politics all the time. I would submit to you that a lot of the good things that you enjoy in life, like free public education is one of them, were the result of political give and take. And many of the things that we experience in life are not perfect yet, but many of them are more perfect than they used to be. And it's all because of the political milieu, if you will. And so I invite you to not just think of politics and the political circumstances always in the negative connotation, because there are some very good results when positive and affirmative political activity can take place. The curriculum fundamentally now, so just from a definitional nuts and bolts perspective, curriculum really is the knowledge and the skills and the ways of thinking and the ways of behaving that we aspire to for the children that we're serving. The knowledge, the skills, the ways of thinking, the ways of behaving that we aspire to for the children that we're serving. That's a good way to think of it, a pretty simplistic way to think of it, I think. And then when we codify that, and that's what you all in your responses have been noting, that you've always thought of the codification piece as being the curriculum. The codification piece is just the documentation of the bigger ideas and the concepts and the principles of the desired learning outcomes. In the healthiest environments, those desired learning outcomes are the result of some political, social, give and take, debate, dialogue, collaborative work. The theory now, we're moving in week, well, before I get to that, let me comment on Sean Cornali's. If you've already looked at the Learning Task 3.3, Sean Cornali's video, he talks about, in relation to the comments I just made about the components, the building blocks of curriculum, if you will. Cornali speaks in terms of time and space components, and those really are speaking to very much to the ways of behaving, ways of thinking elements that I was mentioning to you. But in week 3, we're moving now to theory, and just for simplification purposes, theory is just a way of explaining the way things are. It's just it's a way for us to, in the simplest means possible, to encapsulate This is how it is. Sometimes theory turns into dogma. And dogma is a very different creature because dogma becomes a widely held assumption, even if it's untrue of the way things are. So the theory is an explanation of the way things are, but when it turns into dogma, then it becomes an assumption, an accepted assumption. And all of you, I'm sure, have heard the definition of assumption. Anytime we begin making a lot of assumptions, we start treading out on some pretty thin ice. Certainly, we begin limiting the breadth of our thinking and our willingness to consider other possibilities. A couple of book recommendations I'm going to make. That these books came into mind while I was reading through your responses this week and thinking about the content. One of them was one of the most interesting books I read in the last several years. I have a dear friend who has a son that's on the autism spectrum. The son's now over 40 years old. And so Doug and his wife have been the caretakers for this child, man, if you will, for over 40 years now, and with all the challenges that go with it. But Doug recommended to me a book a couple of years ago by Dr. Barbara Arrowsmith Young. That's a hyphenated woman, Arrowsmith-Young. And she wrote it in 2012. She's Canadian by birth, but I think she works out of New York now. But the title of the book is The Woman Who Changed Her Brain, How I Left My Learning Disability Behind, and Other Stories of Cognitive Transformation. Remarkable book about how Dr. Arrowsmith Young, in her earliest years, realized that her brain didn't work like everyone else's brain worked. She's about my age, so early on, the word retarded was one that was pitched around pretty frequently. In my youth, I'm that old, I think we've learned ourselves out of using that one very much. But she began digging and studying research and trying to understand where the deficiencies were, and began finding that there were particular areas of the brain. In some ways, she was extremely intelligent and proficient. And in some ways, she was extremely handicapped. And so as she began learning about that, she began to develop curriculum for brain exercise to help the brain learn to overcome some of those deficiencies or compensate around them. And so she has several schools now, and school is kind of a loose term for it because they serve students from not much more than toddlers all the way to people that are over 50 years old seek her out. And they enter this school and they learn these brain exercises to help them learn not only what their deficient areas are in their brain work, but how to overcome those and strengthen the areas so that they can function more successfully in society. Very interesting book, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. And then the other book I mentioned to you earlier in my comments about selling curriculum. There's one of my favorite authors is a guy named Daniel Pink. And in 2013, he wrote a book called To Sell is Human, in which he makes a very compelling case that particularly in this day and age, in the age of what the late Dr. Stephen Covey used to call knowledge workers, which is what we are, Daniel Pink makes a very compelling case that every one of us are in the business of sales. And particularly, he points out that those of us that are educators and work in the field of medicine are in sales. It's well worth your time, because in fact, when you and I walk into a classroom, we're selling a product. but certainly those of you that are moving into higher levels of leadership, which I think probably all of you are headed that way, you're going to find yourself more and more in a position of trying to influence and convince and persuade, which is selling. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the chat box and see if you got questions there. I welcome your questions or comments, either in the written form or auditory form. So let me take a look here and get that where I can see it pretty easily. So some of these things I'm still learning Zoom. Some of the things that are written to me come to me in private form, and some of them come to everyone. So if you write it privately, I'll try not to out you. But someone thanked me for the redos. You're welcome. My interest in this whole endeavor is your learning, and I've never been one of those just to take joy in someone failing at all. Early in my career, about the first half of my regular career, I was an athletic coach. So I coached some really, really good athletes, and I coached some pretty crappy ones. But my goal for every one of them was to take them wherever they were today and make them better. Get better every day on purpose, and it's my goal for you all as well. And so I think it's important that you give students opportunity to redo their work if they want to. You really can't force it, not very successfully. It's kind of like forcing an apology. Sometimes you can squeeze it out of somebody, but it didn't sound much like an apology when you do it. Got other questions for me? Either you can put them in the chat box or on about course content or problems of practice, or hell, I'll talk to you about the ranch if you want. We grow most of our own food here, so I'll talk to you about that. Oh, got somebody going to come see the Texas Tech Red Raiders, huh? This weekend. Yeah. I'm about 100 miles from Lubbock. In fact, my doctoral degree is from Texas Tech. So, yeah, this is Red Raider country. The basketball team is making a much better noises than the football team these days. It's a little easier. Back when I was pretending to be a football coach earlier in my career, there was a pretty interesting character by the name of Spike Dykes. It was the head coach at Texas Tech at the time. And I don't know if any of you have ever looked at Google Earth. If you take a flyover of Lubbock, Texas, it looks a little bit like the moonscape, only browner. And I heard Coach Dykes say at a conference one time that once he got the head coaching job at Texas Tech, one of the first things he did was told all of his assistant coaches that they were forbidden from flying recruits in the daylight. They would only fly them into Lubbock, Texas at night because they didn't want them looking down that plane window and seeing nothing but dirt. It looks a little bit like desert, but although there's a lot of irrigated property there. Questions or comments? If you got them. Musica, are you home? Congratulations. I take it all went well. That reminds me, one of the school districts that I served as a superintendent, we developed our own virtual school, and actually by the time I left that job, that school district, it was here in Texas, but by the time I left that job, our virtual school had cornered 1/3 of the the virtual school market in Texas. And much of our teachers, our online teachers, many of them were folks that had worked with me earlier in other schools and other settings earlier in my career. And one of them was one of the absolute best teachers that I've ever encountered, and I hired her out of Los Angeles Unified School District back around 2007, something like that. She was a Spanish teacher, and just remarkable. So we fired up our virtual school, and I was recruiting teachers to work as online teachers, and I knew that this teacher had stepped out of the profession because she was raising a young family. She was having babies. And so I'd been gone from that school where I hired her for a couple of 3 years, and I wasn't sure what she was doing. I just knew that she had stepped out of the classroom. And so I called her and asked if she'd be willing to consider working online from home as a part-time virtual school teacher. And she said, well, Dr. Coulter, I would love to. It would really work for our family. But I live in Guatemala now. And I said, well, I don't care where the hell you live. You're going to be working online. And so she worked for us a couple of years from Guatemala. And then in the last couple of years, she's still working for that virtual school. I'm not with them anymore, but her husband's a diplomat with the United States Department of State. And so she's been working from Mumbai, India as well, teaching kids in Texas how to speak Spanish. But my point is, though, the point I was going to make is she was about to have her third child, and she was working for us in a virtual school. And so the principal and I were anticipating this delivery of the child and trying to put systems in place and a substitute so that she could have 6 weeks of leave with her newborn. And I called her and I said, so we know you're getting close to delivery time. We got a sub lined up for you, and we need to talk about coordinating transfer of your passwords and access and all that stuff to the sub. And she got real quiet on the phone, and she said, Dr. Coulter, do I have to take that leave? And I said, do what? And she says, well, can we just play it by ear? And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, I think since it's online, I think I can deliver the baby and only be offline 3 or 4 days and go back to work. And I said, I've never had anybody try that, but I said, if you want to try it, oh, yeah, okay. And sure enough, she delivered a child, and then she was back at work with her online, teaching Spanish online within about 4 days. I'm not even sure if her students realized that she had a child. So someone's asking me, do I know Professor Jones? No, I do not. I'm assuming that's an adjunct. I assume we don't have a Professor Jones. Well, I say that I'm not that familiar with all the professors in the C&I side. Most of my associations have been with the folks in the MEDL program, but I do not know Professor Jones. There are several adjuncts that work with us, and I think I've told all of you all, I actually live out here in West Texas near Lubbock, and so I show up to Shreveport, once a month, just so they'll remember who they're paying. But I'm about 450 miles from Shreveport. Other questions, if you got them? Okay, well, I want to say thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to learn with and from you in this process. I think, if you reach out to me, you'll hear back from me in a hurry. That's a skill I learned as a principal, by the way. if you're not responsive to your customers, they have a lot of ways of getting even with you. I'll see you all next week, and you know how to find me. Good night.